My iPhone's gentle alarm rang. Morning sunbeams filtered through silk curtains, casting a soft glow across the spacious, luxurious bedroom. The scent of freshly brewed coffee and toasted bread wafted from downstairs. Tuesday morning, 6:30 a.m., perfect, I murmured, stretching leisurely. My name is Eleanor Vance, but everyone in the legal world calls me Elle. At 32, I had everything a woman could dream of. A skyrocketing career, a wonderful husband, and a life that seemed utterly flawless. This penthouse apartment on the Upper West Side, with its Central Park view, was the fruit of 10 years of relentless work. Ethan, my husband, business partner, and the man I loved more than anything in this world, and I built it from the ground up. We started with 2 rickety desks in a shabby rented office and now owned Vance & Miller, one of New York's rising corporate law firms. People called us the golden couple of the legal world, talented and romantic. Ethan, he always guided my life. We met our freshman year of college, dreaming of justice, careers, and a home. He had an unusual charm, a sophisticated look, and a warm smile that always made me feel protected. I was the sharp analytical mind while he brought connections and persuasive abilities. We complemented each other perfectly. He once said, "You are justice, I am power. Together, we will conquer this world, Elle." My mornings always began with a run around Central Park. Each steady stride on the paved path, I breathed in the fresh air, feeling the bustling rhythm of the city waking up. It was the only moment I allowed myself to stop thinking about complex contract clauses or multi-million-dollar lawsuits. I thought about Ethan, about our plan to buy a house with a garden in the suburbs next year, about having children and the family life we often spoke of. My life. It was like a perfect painting, every stroke painted with trust and love. When I returned, Ethan was already in the kitchen. The smell of scrambled eggs and bacon was delicious. He turned, his usual radiant smile, but today there was something subtly different. A fleeting frown, then gone as soon as he saw me. "Good morning, my beautiful lawyer," he said, kissing my forehead. "You have an early meeting with the Japanese partners today, right? I've already made your strong black coffee." "Thank you, Ethan," I replied, feeling a warmth spread through me. "You're the best husband." We ate breakfast quickly, exchanging our busy schedules for the day. Ethan mentioned a big upcoming case involving a tech conglomerate. He said Chloe Hayes, his personal secretary, an ambitious young lawyer recently promoted to junior partner, would be a great help to him on this project. Chloe. That name made me pause slightly. Chloe was someone I had personally recruited 3 years ago. She was intelligent, resourceful, and always seemed to admire me. I treated her like a younger sister, always willing to share my experience and support her work. I even helped her get a small apartment in Brooklyn when she first moved to New York. Lately, Chloe and Ethan spent more time working together, meetings stretching late into the night, work messages exchanged outside of office hours. I didn't pay much attention. The legal world was like that. High-pressure jobs and close colleagues bonding was normal. I trusted Ethan implicitly. He wasn't that kind of man. Or so, I thought. "Chloe is very dedicated," Ethan said, his gaze drifting slightly when he mentioned her. "She works day and night for this project." "That's good," I replied, trying not to overthink it. "I trust both of you." I didn't know that my trust was about to be pulverized into 100 pieces. This moment of false happiness, this feeling of absolute security, was about to turn to ashes. The smell of coffee and toast today suddenly became bland. I had no idea I was standing on the precipice of a deep abyss created by the very people I trusted most. And I, Eleanor Vance, was about to face a brutal truth, a truth that would change my life forever. The taxi horn honked from the street below. Elle looked out the window. The following days passed like a nightmare. The penthouse that was once my home was now empty and cold. Ethan had moved out, taking not only his belongings but also the beautiful memories we shared, leaving a gaping void in my heart. I lingered in the apartment, which was jointly owned but no longer felt like mine alone, cut off from all financial resources. My credit cards were blocked, my bank accounts frozen. I, a top corporate lawyer in New York, now didn't even have enough money to buy a carton of milk. The slanders from the press were like knives twisting in my gut. Lawyer L. Vance, greedy and immoral. Shocking scandal rocks New York legal world. Friends turned their backs. Colleagues avoided me. The legal community, where I was once highly respected, now looked at me like a pariah. My phone rang incessantly with calls from reporters, from critics, but no one asked if I was okay. I hid in my apartment, curtains drawn tight, not daring to let in the daylight. Every sound from the outside world made me tremble. My mother, a traditional woman, called and sobbed uncontrollably. She didn't understand what was happening, only advised me to be patient and save face. She didn't know that my face had been torn to shreds. I didn't blame her. She was just living in a world she understood. But I needed support, a word of trust, and I couldn't find it. I felt more alone than ever. Some nights I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window looking out at the city's glittering lights, wondering why everything had collapsed so quickly. I recalled Ethan's promises, our vows, our shared dreams. Now, they were just hollow lies, knives twisting deeper into my heart. Physical pain was perhaps easier to bear than this mental agony. It gnawed at me from within, making me feel rotten. I cried until no tears were left. The pain seemed to have eroded all my emotions, leaving a cold, empty void. At times I thought about giving up, accepting my fate. But then, whenever I looked in the mirror, seeing a haggard Ella with swollen eyes and messy hair, a small flame ignited within me. It was the flame of anger, of resentment, and above all, the yearning for justice. That very night I confronted Ethan. He initially denied everything, but when I revealed Chloe's evidence, he crumbled. Not with remorse, but with anger and arrogance. He admitted everything and was even crueler when he said he was tired of a woman like me who only focused on work, that I didn't understand what he needed. He even sneered that I couldn't give him a child, something we had discussed and agreed to postpone to focus on our careers. Ethan added with contempt in his voice that he had been preparing for this for a long time. And this was the final blow. The next morning, I arrived at the office, my head still reeling from the bitter truth. A letter from the firm's board lay on my desk. I was immediately suspended from work on charges of embezzlement and leaking confidential client information. The letter was signed by Ethan Miller and Edward Vance, the firm's other co-founder, the man I always called my mentor in the legal world, whom I trusted implicitly, and who was Chloe's nominal father. It turned out Chloe wasn't just Ethan's mistress. She was Edward Vance's illegitimate daughter. And this was an elaborate conspiracy, not just for Ethan to have an heir, but for Edward to remove me from the firm. Edward Vance, the man who always said he was proud of me, that I was his successor, had betrayed me in the cruelest way. He wanted Chloe to replace me, not just in a familial relationship, but in the role of a top lawyer at the firm. Everything became brutally clear. They had used Ethan's affair and Chloe's pregnancy as a shield, covering up a much larger conspiracy to seize complete control of the firm and permanently remove me from the legal profession. They had framed me with forged accounts, doctored emails, and false testimonies from trusted employees. I lost access to joint bank accounts. My reputation was destroyed overnight by sensational, slanderous articles in tabloid news. I felt like I was falling into a bottomless abyss. Lost my husband, lost my family, lost my career, lost my reputation, lost everything I had built with my blood, sweat, and tears. The feeling of being betrayed not only by the man I loved, but also by my mentor, my foster father, whom I deeply respected, was 1,000 times more painful. I looked at the headlines. Lawyer L. Vance, greedy and immoral. Shocking scandal rocks New York legal world. and felt a fire ignite in my chest. It was no longer pain. It was rage. A cold, brutal rage, burning away everything left within me. "You will pay," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "All of you." The following days of despair were horrific. The penthouse that was once my home was now empty and cold. Ethan had moved out, taking not only his belongings but also the beautiful memories we shared, leaving a gaping void in my heart. I lingered in the apartment, which was jointly owned but no longer felt like mine alone, cut off from all financial resources. My credit cards were blocked, my bank accounts frozen. I, a top corporate lawyer in New York, now didn't even have enough money to buy a carton of milk. The slanders from the press were like knives twisting in my gut. Lawyer L. Vance, greedy and immoral. Shocking scandal rocks New York legal world. Friends turned their backs. Colleagues avoided me. The legal community, where I was once highly respected, now looked at me like a pariah. My phone rang incessantly with calls from reporters, from critics, but no one asked if I was okay. I hid in my apartment, curtains drawn tight, not daring to let in the daylight. Every sound from the outside world made me tremble. My mother, a traditional woman, called and sobbed uncontrollably. She didn't understand what was happening, only advised me to be patient and save face. She didn't know that my face had been torn to shreds. I didn't blame her. She was just living in a world she understood. But I needed support, a word of trust, and I couldn't find it. I felt more alone than ever. Some nights I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window looking out at the city's glittering lights, wondering why everything had collapsed so quickly. I remembered Ethan's promises, our vows, our shared dreams. Now they were just hollow lies, knives twisting deeper into my heart. Physical pain was perhaps easier to bear than this mental agony. It gnawed at me from within, making me feel rotten. I cried until no tears were left. The pain seemed to have eroded all my emotions, leaving a cold, empty void. At times I thought about giving up, accepting my fate. But then, whenever I looked in the mirror, seeing a haggard Elle with swollen eyes and messy hair, a small flame ignited within me. It was the flame of anger, of resentment, and above all, the yearning for justice. I remembered my father's words. "My daughter, in life, sometimes you will fall. What matters is not how hard you fall, but how you get back up." My father was a small-time lawyer. He wasn't rich or famous, but he was the one who instilled in me a love for the law and a belief in justice. He passed away a few years ago, but his words echoed in my mind like a reminder. I couldn't let him down. I couldn't let them win so easily. One day, as I was cleaning up the mess in my apartment, I found an old box filled with documents from my first cases, small, obscure cases, but where I learned to dig deep for information and search for the truth. A light flashed in my head. I was L. Vance, a lawyer. They could take my firm, my reputation, my money, but they couldn't take my intellect and my skills. I opened the old laptop I kept hidden in a secret drawer, the laptop I used for personal projects, unrelated to the firm. It was the only asset of mine they hadn't been able to seize. I started typing, slowly at first, then gradually faster. I was no longer a powerful lawyer, but I was still an intelligent woman, and I would use everything I had to fight. And then, one night, I found it. An old article from 2 years ago, unrelated to my case, but mentioning a major money laundering scandal involving a prominent financial company for which Edward Vance had served as legal counsel. Edward Vance's name flashed, and I recalled some unusual transactions that Ethan and Edward had discussed privately, which I wasn't allowed to be a part of. At the time, I didn't think much of it. But now, the pieces began to fit together. It wasn't me who embezzled. Perhaps I was just a pawn to cover up a much bigger crime. The fire within me was no longer just anger. It was determination. A cold, brutal determination, forged from pain and humiliation. I no longer cried. I no longer feared. I had only one goal: to get everything back, not just the firm or my reputation, but justice, for me and for those they had deceived. I wouldn't just get back up. I would return stronger than ever, and they would pay for every tear I had shed. After weeks, even months of grappling with pain and despair, I was no longer the L. Vance of old. That name, once a symbol of dedication and integrity, was now dead. From the wreckage, I began to rebuild myself, not to reclaim what was lost, but to forge a new person, sharper, more ruthless, and more dangerous. My goal was clear, not just to seek justice, but to expose the true faces of Edward Vance, Ethan Miller, and Chloe Hayes, to utterly destroy their reputations, finances, and power. I spent weeks, even months, buried in public law libraries and online forums specializing in finance and business. I no longer had access to professional databases, but I still had my mind. I reread public financial reports of Vance and Miller, articles about Edward Vance, and the major cases he had been involved in. I searched for clues, the smallest oversights that an ordinary person would miss. The more I investigated, the more I realized that the embezzlement case I was framed for was just a small part of a much larger picture. Ethan and Edward didn't just want to eliminate me. They were involved in a large-scale money laundering operation through complex transactions, using major client corporations as a front. They had leveraged Vance and Miller's reputable position to legitimize dirty money. Framing me was a perfect two-birds-with-one-stone move, removing a potential rival and covering up a more serious criminal activity. My plan began to take shape, meticulous as a multi-million-dollar lawsuit. I divided it into several phases, each a fatal blow to a pillar of their empire. I couldn't show my face. I needed eyes and ears on the inside. I contacted the only people I could still trust, or at least who had common interests. David Chen, a private investigator I had worked with on a small case years ago. He had a reputation as an information hunter who wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty, and more importantly, he owed me a favor. I asked him to investigate Edward Vance and Chloe Hayes' secret financial dealings, as well as Ethan's connections to the underground financial world. I knew David worked for many people, but I trusted him to keep my involvement confidential. I gave him what little money I had left and promised a larger sum when everything was over. Sarah Jenkins, an independent investigative journalist known for exposing financial and ethical scandals in high society. I didn't contact her directly. I created an anonymous email sending her vague clues about a law firm involved in money laundering and a lawyer framed to cover up a bigger crime. I knew Sarah wouldn't ignore any breadcrumbs. The goal of this phase was to weaken the bond between Ethan and Chloe, making them distrust each other. I used fake social media accounts and anonymous emails to send casual but truthful information about Ethan and Chloe's relationship to people in their circle whom I knew would spread rumors quickly. Not just about their affair, but about their finances. For example, a hint that Chloe was siphoning funds from secret deals unknown to Ethan, or that Ethan was planning to cut Chloe out of a share of the profits. I asked David to find information about Ethan's past affairs or any shady financial dealings he had hidden from Chloe. The aim was to make Chloe feel insecure or to doubt Ethan's loyalty. This was the most complex phase, where I would use my legal knowledge and David's assistance to directly attack their assets and legal standing. I found some minority shareholders in Vance and Miller, those who had been marginalized by Ethan and Edward after my departure. I used David to contact them, providing information about the money laundering activities and potential legal risks of the firm. I would pull strings for them to collectively file a lawsuit against the board for breach of fiduciary duty and harming shareholder interests, demanding a forensic audit of the company. This would force Edward and Ethan to open their books, and that's when I could find more concrete evidence. David discovered that Edward Vance had a much darker history than his respectable facade suggested. He had been involved in a financial scandal 20 years ago, but it had been skillfully covered up. This information, if exposed, would destroy Edward's reputation and shake Vance and Miller to its core. While working with David, I began to notice something strange. David seemed to have too much information about Edward Vance, even very personal details that couldn't have been obtained through ordinary investigation. He was also overly eager to expose Edward. One evening, as I was reviewing the files David sent, I found a small detail, an old photo in Edward Vance's 20-year-old case file, showing a young woman standing next to an older man. The woman's figure, disturbingly familiar. I zoomed in on the photo. Yes, it was David Chen's mother. She had been Edward Vance's personal secretary 20 years ago and was also framed in that scandal, going to prison so Edward could walk free. David wasn't just helping me. He was using me to exact revenge for his mother. He was a reluctant ally with complex motives, a spy with his own agenda. This truth sent a chill down my spine, but also added another layer of intrigue. Could I trust David? Or was I just a pawn in his game too? The plan was ready. I had sown the seeds. Now it was time to wait. I didn't know how much I would pay for this revenge, but I no longer cared. I had gone too far to stop. The plan was set. Now it was time for action. I knew I had to move in the shadows like an unseen hand, controlling everything from afar. Every step had to be precise, leaving no trace that could lead back to me. The first step was to trigger the lawsuit by the minority shareholders. I had asked David Chen, my reluctant ally, to approach them. David, with his private investigator experience and network, cleverly reminded the shareholders of their neglected interests and the potential financial risks from the shady transactions Edward Vance and Ethan were carrying out. "We don't directly tell them to sue anyone," I instructed David via a burner phone. "Just plant the seeds of doubt and provide enough information for them to realize their own interests. They'll do the rest themselves." And as expected, within weeks, a group of minority shareholders collectively filed a demand for a comprehensive independent audit of Vance and Miller's financial statements, specifically highlighting recent mergers and acquisitions. This move immediately sent shockwaves through the firm. I imagined Edward and Ethan scrambling to silence the shareholders, but it was too late. The law was clear, and they couldn't easily deny this legitimate request without raising further suspicion. As Vance and Miller struggled with the internal audit, I activated the next blow, a hit to Edward Vance's reputation. David had provided me with full evidence of the financial scandal 20 years ago, where his mother, an innocent secretary, had been framed by Edward to take the fall. I didn't give the information directly to Sarah Jenkins. Instead, I created a new anonymous email account with the IP address disguised through multiple layers of international proxies. I sent Sarah a document package containing copies of old case files, obscure local articles, and a blurry photo of David's mother with Edward in the past. Along with it was a brief message: the truth about the man of justice Edward Vance, a buried crime. I knew Sarah was a seasoned investigative journalist. She wouldn't pass up this juicy bait. A few days later, a long article on Sarah Jenkins' investigative blog appeared with a sensational headline, "Shadows of the Past, Edward Vance, Architect of a Forgotten Scandal." The article didn't draw conclusions, but raised a series of questions, providing enough evidence for the public to start suspecting. This created a strong wave of criticism on social media and within the legal community. Edward Vance's prestige, once considered a legend in the industry, began to plummet seriously. Major clients started to worry. Partners became wary. Pressure from both inside and outside the firm mounted on Ethan and Edward. This was the most subtle part, where I exploited Ethan's cowardice and Chloe's greed. I used fake social media accounts and anonymous emails to send casual but truthful information about Ethan and Chloe's relationship to people in their circle, whom I knew would spread rumors quickly. Not just about their affair, but about their finances. For example, a hint that Chloe was siphoning funds from secret deals unknown to Ethan, or that Ethan was planning to cut Chloe out of a share of the profits. Conversely, I sent Ethan fabricated evidence that Chloe was secretly contacting a rival firm and learning from Vance and Miller's major contracts to prepare to defect and take company secrets with her. I knew Chloe was ambitious enough to do it, and Ethan was suspicious enough to believe it. This information, while not directly slander, was based on their characters and underlying truths. It immediately sowed deep distrust between Ethan and Chloe. Tense arguments began to erupt in their offices and at their home. Their passionate love gradually turned into suspicion and resentment. As the firm teetered on the brink of a reputational and legal crisis, and Ethan and Chloe's relationship became extremely strained, Edward Vance, in an attempt to salvage the situation, decided to hold an urgent press conference. The goal was to refute all accusations and reassure the public. However, during the press conference, their own internal discord became their Achilles heel. Ethan, inherently cowardly and unable to handle pressure, accidentally revealed contradictory details in his statements. Chloe, with her greedy nature and desire to control everything, interrupted Ethan multiple times, even rudely correcting him right on live television. They argued in hushed tones, glaring at each other, their faces clearly showing tension and distrust. That moment I watched on my old TV, and a cold smile spread across my lips. Their own arrogance and internal disagreements destroyed the image of a stable firm they tried to build. The public no longer believed any explanation. They saw a law firm rotting from within, with conflicted and dishonest leaders. This was the perfect self-destruction, where they strangled themselves. I didn't need to show my face. I just needed to subtly influence, and my enemies tore off their own masks. My revenge wasn't a single blow, but a meticulously constructed labyrinth, where the more they tried to escape, the deeper they sank into the mire they created themselves. My fight wasn't just about direct attacks. It was a complex chess game where each piece had multiple facets and buried secrets were always ready to spring out. I had sown the seeds of doubt, and now they were blooming into shocking twists, exposing the rawest truths. As Edward Vance and Ethan Miller struggled to deal with the audit crisis and rampant rumors, I received an unexpected call from an unknown number. It was a trembling voice, sobbing. "Elle, it's me, Chloe. I need your help." I listened in silence. I had expected her to call to challenge me or to beg, but that tone was entirely different. Chloe revealed that the embezzlement I was framed for, and even her pregnancy with Ethan, were all part of Edward Vance's plan to eliminate me. But not only that, Edward had been manipulating Chloe for a very long time. Edward wasn't just Chloe's biological father, he was also a dictatorial father who controlled her life from childhood. He wanted Chloe to replace me, not just out of jealousy towards me, but also because he wanted Chloe to be completely under his control within the firm. Chloe was also a victim, in her own way. She was forced to seduce Ethan, forced to participate in framing me. She feared Edward and dared not defy him. The pregnancy with Ethan was also a setup to bind Ethan to Chloe, serving Edward's interests. Chloe had always been threatened by Edward that he would destroy her career and life if she didn't obey. This twist made me realize that my enemies were not just Ethan and Chloe, but a toxic relationship and Edward's brutal manipulation. It didn't make me forget Chloe's betrayal, but it gave me a different perspective on her motives. Was there any redemption for Chloe? Or was she just trying to escape? When Vance and Miller's internal audit reached a dead end due to Ethan and Edward's obstruction, I decided to deliver a stronger blow. I used David to leak financial documents I had secretly collected earlier, from when I was still at the firm, documents that felt unusual but I hadn't had time to investigate deeply, to Sarah Jenkins. These documents not only showed a lack of transparency in transactions, but also pointed to a network of shell companies abroad that Edward and Ethan used. Sarah, with the keen insight of an investigative journalist, quickly found connections between these shell companies and an organized crime syndicate in Eastern Europe specializing in arms and drug trafficking. They had used Vance and Miller as a legitimate channel to launder hundreds of millions of dollars in dirty money. My embezzlement case was just a perfect excuse to cut me off from the firm, preventing me from discovering this illicit activity. The news exploded like a bombshell. This twist was not just a personal betrayal, but also an international financial scandal, drawing the attention of the FBI and the Department of Justice. Vance and Miller, from a reputable law firm, suddenly became the focus of a transnational money laundering investigation. Edward and Ethan's reputations utterly collapsed, not just in the legal community but on the international stage. As I had vaguely realized, David Chen wasn't just helping me out of a favor. He harbored a much deeper grudge against Edward Vance. When I confronted him about his mother's involvement in Edward's 20-year-old scandal, David admitted it. His mother, a young and talented secretary, had been exploited and framed by Edward in a major financial fraud case so he could escape conviction. She had spent several years in prison, her life ruined. David had spent his childhood in an orphanage, growing up with a burning hatred for Edward. He had been tracking Edward Vance for years, collecting every piece of information, waiting for the opportune moment to exact his revenge. I, L. Vance, was that opportunity. He saw in me the determination and ability, and decided to use me as a key pawn to achieve his goal. You are the spear, and I am the one sharpening it, David said, his eyes cold. This twist made me realize a bitter truth. Even in my fight for justice, I was being used by others. It raised questions about ethics and boundaries. Should I continue to trust David, knowing he was also playing his own game? But at that point, I had no other choice. Our goals aligned, at least for now. As everything crumbled around them, Ethan and Chloe tried to execute one final counter plan. They knew the FBI was closing in, and the only way out was to fully blame someone else to escape. Their plan was to fabricate evidence, blame a deceased former company accountant, and frame Elle once again by finding forged emails or documents from me, showing I was the mastermind behind the entire money laundering scheme. They even planned to flee the country once everything was settled. However, at the most crucial moment, the deep fear and discord between Ethan and Chloe ruined everything. Ethan, inherently cowardly, trembled with fear at the prospect of prison. He wanted to stab Chloe first to save himself. Chloe, with her greedy nature and desire to always be in control, scorned Ethan's weakness. In a fierce argument just before their meeting with a private lawyer to finalize their escape plan, Chloe accidentally revealed details about how Edward Vance had used similar tactics, blaming others, to escape conviction in the past. That very statement ignited Ethan's suspicion about the old man Edward and planted the seed that he too might be sacrificed by Edward if he wasn't careful. This division had been sowed by Elle earlier, and now it exploded. Ethan, in his extreme fear, secretly contacted the FBI and gave a statement, accusing Chloe and Edward, hoping for leniency. He didn't know that the FBI already had enough evidence from Elle and David. Ethan's action only further confirmed his guilt and cornered Chloe. This was the perfect self-destruction, where the enemies strangled themselves. After Sarah Jenkins published her shocking article about Edward Vance's past and Vance and Miller's shady connections to international money laundering, things quickly escalated from a media crisis to a criminal crisis. The FBI officially launched a full-scale investigation into Vance and Miller, freezing accounts and summoning Edward, Ethan, and Chloe for questioning. All three were banned from leaving the country. I followed every news update on TV and my phone, feeling a cold satisfaction. But I knew it wasn't over. They would still try to escape. Ethan would never accept prison, and Edward would protect his empire to the very end. Chloe, with her strong survival instinct, would also fight until her last breath. My final opportunity came on a fateful morning. I received a message from David Chen. Public hearing regarding the asset freeze of Vance and Miller. Tomorrow, federal court. This is your chance. I knew this was when I had to show up, unofficially, to ensure everything went as I wished. The next day, I appeared at the federal courthouse. I didn't enter the main courtroom, but sat in the public viewing area, blending in with the crowd. I saw Ethan, Chloe, and Edward Vance. They sat far apart, their faces etched with tension and exhaustion. Gone were their usual confident, arrogant expressions. They looked like marionettes whose strings had been cut, awaiting their fate. Edward's lawyer was trying to convince the judge that Vance and Miller was a victim of conspiracy and misinformation, but his defense sounded weak. Then suddenly, Ethan Miller stood up. Pale-faced, he began to accuse Edward Vance and Chloe Hayes. "Your Honor," Ethan's voice trembled, "I want to tell the truth. Edward Vance pulled me and Chloe into a massive money laundering scheme. He used the firm to cover up dirty dealings. Chloe, she was an accomplice, and also his illegitimate daughter. She was the one who seduced me, and he used her pregnancy to bind me to this plan." Chloe shot to her feet, eyes red. "Ethan, how dare you lie? You were the mastermind. You were the one who propositioned me, and you ordered Elle to be framed to take over the firm." The two began to argue loudly right in the middle of the hearing, blaming each other for every detail. Edward Vance roared, trying to silence them, but it was too late. All eyes in the room were on that disgusting spectacle. Their arrogance and internal discord had destroyed them. They had prepared a counterplan, but their division and fear had turned them into cornered animals, ready to tear each other apart. When the hearing recessed, I quietly left the courthouse. Outside, FBI cars were waiting. Edward Vance, Ethan Miller, and Chloe Hayes were led away in handcuffs. Edward still tried to maintain a calm facade, but his eyes gleamed with despair. Ethan buried his face while Chloe turned back, her gaze meeting mine across the crowd. For a moment, I saw hatred, but also a hint of surrender. Perhaps she was just too tired of this game. I no longer felt the intense gratification I had expected. There was only an odd emptiness. The revenge was complete. But had I truly won? My ultimate revenge wasn't putting them in prison, but forcing them to destroy each other, to expose their true selves to the public. I didn't need a trial just for myself. Public opinion, the FBI, and their own division became the most effective instruments of revenge. As I stood there watching the FBI cars disappear, my phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. "I'm sorry, Elle. I want a fresh start." It was Chloe. I read the message, but didn't reply. I didn't know if I could forgive her, or if she was truly remorseful. And then, another call. It was Edward Vance. His voice was hoarse, full of hatred. "You think you've won, Elle? You've awakened an even more terrifying enemy than me. You've awakened the demon within yourself. You'll have to live with it forever." He snarled. Then the line went dead. Edward Vance's words echoed in my head. I looked down at my hands. They were not stained with blood, but I felt a coldness. I had achieved my goal. My enemies had been punished. But had I truly won this war? Or had I lost a part of myself in this brutal journey of vengeance? The FBI and Department of Justice investigation proceeded swiftly after Ethan's testimony and the evidence Sarah Jenkins had published. I followed all developments through the news, no longer feeling a burning anger, but a frightening tranquility. Edward Vance, the man who was once a pillar in the legal world, faced a barrage of charges for money laundering, fraud, and obstruction of justice. His illustrious career completely collapsed. The evidence of international money laundering that David and I had collected, along with Ethan's testimony, was more than enough for him to have no defense. Edward was permanently disbarred. All his assets related to illicit activities were seized. He faced a long prison sentence and would die in isolation, his reputation tarnished, becoming a stain on the history of New York law. Those who once admired him now turned their backs, looking at him with contempt. Ethan Miller, despite testifying against Edward and Chloe in hopes of leniency, could not escape the law's grasp. He was part of the money laundering network, and his actions in framing me, as well as his professional misconduct, were exposed. Although he didn't receive the heaviest sentence like Edward, Ethan also faced a significant prison term for complicity and fraud. Vance and Miller was shut down, and all his legitimate assets were seized for restitution. He lost all his money, reputation, and even Chloe, the woman he betrayed me for. The life he dreamed of power and wealth vanished into thin air. He would be released from prison in middle age, penniless, nameless, familyless. Chloe Hayes, after being mutually accused by Edward and Ethan, found herself in the most desperate situation. She faced serious charges for complicity in money laundering, fraud, and other offenses. Her pregnancy with Ethan, although initially part of the conspiracy, was also brought to light as part of the deception. Edward Vance's family disowned her. She had no protection left. Tragically, Chloe's pregnancy did not survive the intense pressure and sudden events during the investigation. She lost her child, lost the future she had desperately tried to secure. Chloe faced a prison sentence. Upon release, she would face a completely new life, without status, without anyone to rely on, bearing the full consequences of her wrong choices and manipulation. Their punishment was not just prison sentences or loss of assets. It was a complete destruction of reputation, social standing, and all relationships. They dug their own graves with their greed, selfishness, and betrayal. After all was said and done, I, Eleanor Vance, had won. My enemies had paid the price. But as Edward Vance had said, I had awakened a demon within myself. I was no longer the Elle of old. The pain, the betrayal, and the journey of revenge had changed me forever. I became sharper, more vigilant, and no longer easily trusted anyone. The intense joy of my enemy's downfall that I had expected never came. Instead, there was an odd emptiness, a quiet after the storm, like a fighter who has just finished a match, victorious, but his body bruised and utterly exhausted. I did not return to high-stakes corporate law. I realized that world was too cold, too full of schemes. I used my skills to do pro bono work, free legal consultation, for the wrongly accused, for the vulnerable abused by large corporations or those in power. David Chen, my reluctant companion, occasionally contacted me, providing information or offering help in cases I was pursuing. We shared a silent respect, an unspoken understanding, though I knew he still carried his own scars from the past. My life was simpler. I moved to a smaller apartment in Brooklyn, closer to everyday life. I devoted time to activities I had neglected, reading, drawing, and walking in the park. I learned to accept the truth that perfect justice might not exist, and happily ever after might just be a fairy tale. I realized that the process of revenge had left deep scars on my soul. Sometimes I still woke up at night, haunted by the faces of Ethan, Chloe, and Edward as they crumbled. I questioned everything, not easily opening up. I had lost a part of my innocence and trust. That was the price I had to pay for justice. But precisely because of this, I learned to cherish the small things, the peace of a morning, a stranger's smile, or the feeling of helping someone. I learned to forgive myself, not for what I had done, but for becoming a strong survivor. I remained single. After Ethan, I was no longer in a hurry to find love. I needed time to heal. I knew I deserved genuine love, but I also knew I had to love myself first. I am a warrior, and my scars are a testament to the battles I've fought. They don't make me weaker, they make me stronger, wiser. This is my story. Eleanor Vance, a journey filled with pain, betrayal, but also the most powerful awakening. After hearing this story, how do you feel? Have you ever faced cruel betrayal and longed for justice? Share your thoughts in the comments below.